can look. Don't look that way.
I can just turn my flashlight on to you. Yeah.
It really is weird. It's like just right there.
Yeah. It's like they're not. Like
You're shining. Don't worry.
You are shining.
Should I move somewhere?
No, you're fine. It's just like dark.
The 2017 Information Systems Job Index. But before I get into the Information Systems Job Index, I wanted to talk about the information systems labor market and just how healthy it is. In 2017, there were about 3 million jobs in the US that were related to information systems. Your system and business analyst, software and application developers, cybersecurity, UX design, CTOs, CIOs, and the list is expanding. There are approximately 1,300 AIS programs in the US classified under STEM and are typically called your information systems, management information systems, and computer information systems. I say typically because I believe here at UT Dallas it's information technology systems, And actually, on my flight here, I had the pleasure of sitting next to a proud father who saw me reviewing my slide deck and let me know that his daughter is graduating from with a degree in HRIS, which is Human Resource Information Systems. So we know that it's large and growing, but despite its large and growing size, the IT labor market is largely hidden. The recruitment, mindset, education, demographic, career path, skills, and jobs of IT professionals are different and remain very misunderstood and rarely promoted because we're so often grouped in with computer engineers and computer scientists. So we wanted to know what a typical IS student looks like. Were they in demand at graduation? If they were in demand, what kind of jobs were they getting? And what was the salary of those jobs? When it came to offers, why did students accept certain offers and reject other offers? And then lastly, how did they feel about their level of knowledge? Were they confident with their skill set come graduation? That's why the Information System Job Index was created, to answer all of those questions for students, faculty, and business professionals. It is the only national assessment of IS demographics, placement, offer details, acceptance and rejection information, job market, and confidence levels of 2,100 recent graduates of IS, MIS, and CIS programs from 58 universities across the country. How did we do it? Well, I don't know about you, but taking long self-assessing surveys is not something that I like to do in my free time. So we really wanted to make sure that all the questions that we have were crucial in forming information for our current data set and comparing it with our 2013 and 2015 data set. Once we were satisfied with our survey content, we had the participating universities send the survey to their recent graduates, along with an incentive of a $10 Amazon gift card that was given to the first 20 students that completed it from each of their universities. Once we closed the survey, we had to clean the data to make sure that it was a valid representation. So we detected, corrected, and removed any duplicate entries, corrupt entries, or inaccurate entries. Once the data was cleaned, we used IBM SPSS statistical software to perform frequencies and linear regressions to form meaningful relationships. And then lastly, before we got into the National Information Systems Job Index, we created custom reports for each one of the participating universities. These are the 34 universities that agreed to be a part of our index, and each one of them got a custom report of their program's recent graduates' demographics, acceptance and rejection information, job details, job search and job market confidence, and where their students felt their knowledge level was. For schools that had large data sets of both bachelor graduates and master graduates, we were able to create 2 separate reports for that university. Here are just some graphs that would be a part of that custom report, such as race, the amount of interviews a student attended before accepting an offer, the size of the organization that students accepted an offer at, how confident they felt in their job search and in the job market, where they felt their level of knowledge was at graduation. There's also ordinal breakdowns of reasons they accepted offers and reasons they rejected offers, listed in categories of compensation, job specifics and growth, location, employees and culture, and job fit. But back to the National IS Job Index. When it came to answering the question of what a typical IS student looks like, we found that half of IS students are white, with a quarter being Asian, and 39% are female, which is double the percentage of other STEM fields such as computer scientists, and that number has been growing consistently since 2013. So watch out, guys. Bachelor graduates, average age was 23 years old with just under 3 years of experience, and master graduates were 28 years old with about 4.5 years of experience. Are IS graduates in high demand? Well, yes. The Bachelor IS placement rate was 74% at graduation and 84% 6 months post-graduation. Also, female job placement is higher than males in both bachelor programs and master programs. What kind of jobs are students getting? Well, to kind of piggyback on the last slide, 84% of those jobs are going to people with at least one internship or more. We found that the most popular jobs are in advisory or analytics, with 31% of all jobs being either advisory and consulting or data and analytics. 66% of all Bachelor IS graduates accepted job offers from very large firms, with 22% accepting jobs from large to medium-sized firms, and 12% accepted offers from small or very small firms. Where are these offers coming from? Well, not in the graduate's backyard, surprisingly. All of the offers that were from the Mid-Atlantic region actually went to graduates that did not live in the Mid-Atlantic region. And when it comes to master graduates, 90% of offers from the Pacific region went to students that did not live in that region. So what do these jobs pay? Well, when it comes to pay, the IS salary offers have consistently grown for both bachelor's and master's from 2013 to 2017, with an increase of 9% from 2015. Information system salaries are significantly higher than your typical business majors, and we found that the highest paying jobs for bachelor graduates are information security analysts, and for master graduates are software application development. And gender-based salary differences are statistically insignificant when it comes to IS-related jobs. But we found that compensation actually isn't the most important thing when it comes to a job offer. It, along with the job itself and the organization, are actually the least important reasons when it came to accepting an offer. With the most being process fairness, job fit, and the reputation of the organization, with the only difference between accepting a job and rejecting a job being the performance or lack of a recruiter, which was actually very important when it came to a student deciding to reject an offer. 81% of bachelor graduates felt that they were very enthusiastic about the offer, and 84% felt that they were accepting an offer from an appealing organization. And then, do students feel ready at graduation? Well, first, it does pay to study. IS bachelors received a significantly higher salary when they reported advanced IS business and foundational knowledge compared to just having awareness and literacy of the skills. And IS graduates are consistently confident in their business and foundational skills, yet are not as confident in their technical skills. The graph on the side shows that when it comes to an increase of knowledge, there's a significantly larger payoff for knowing those technical skills compared to the foundational skills. Foundational increase from awareness to advanced knowledge adds about $6,000 more to your salary offer, whereas technical knowledge going from awareness to detailed advanced knowledge adds double that. So yeah, it pays to not only study, but to be passionate about what you're studying. You aren't going to get the advanced detail knowledge just going for a grade, but actually enjoying what you're getting the grade for. If you're interested in reading the report, it's at isjobindex.com, or if your university is not a part of, if you didn't see your university up there and are interested in information to have your university be a part of the next one, feel free to contact me at my email. Thanks. Did anyone have any questions? Go ahead.
Do you have insight into the notion that when we tracked it, students that were participated in AIS as leaders and students that did research got significantly higher job offers? Do you have any comments on that?
We don't have the data if they were particularly part of an organization such as that, but when it comes to the experience, that is kind of grouped in with that question, so that's where we would put that data.
Is there any data available on, say, 5 years into the career, and data on progression and how fast students who graduate get promotions, for example?
That's kind of outside of the scope. I think that's awesome information, but this is more about recent graduates, so we kind of wanted to keep the scope to just that. Go ahead.
So is this data from students who have graduated from Temple on the numbers?
No, this is the 58 universities that I mentioned in the beginning. That's where all of the data comes from. So there was 2,100, a little bit more than 2,100 students that filled out the survey from across the country. All right. Okay, awesome. So next we're going to go into a job readiness panel, and I'm happy to introduce the panel. It's going to be Professor Fred Niederman from St. Louis University and Professor Stady. And Professor Stacy Petter from Baylor University. So given individual mics.
Can I take a shot at this fellow's question here?
Yeah.
So you were asking about 5 years after.
Yes.
We did a study, it's a little old now, about 15 years ago. And we asked our graduates at 2 universities, mine and one across the river from us in Illinois. And we asked people what their starting salary was, and their ending salary at their prior job, their current job starting salary, and their last one. One of the things that we found that was interesting is that relative to like civil engineering that had a 95% retention rate in 5 years, ours was about 80%. And we had in IS, and we had a lot of people leave IS altogether. Both what they would do often, our graduates would start in IS and then go to a user group like marketing or accounting, and others left the field, left business altogether, became like a massage therapists or football players and stuff like that. But it was kind of interesting. The other thing that I'll just mention is we asked about salaries, and at every level, starting, ending your first job, starting your next job, on average, men's salary was about $10,000 higher at every point. However, the variance within men and the variance within women was so large that it was less than a standard deviation of difference. So a high-paid starting person might get $90,000, low-paid $20,000, and the variance on average was very high. So that I'm convinced that there's a very real and significant difference, just not statistically.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So the topic for today is job readiness. I have a few questions, though at the end we can definitely open it up to the audience if you have any questions to ask the professors. So to start things off, since job readiness can be a pretty broad topic, what does job readiness mean to you, and how relevant do you think it is after you start working?
So there's clearly different skills and that you need to be successful in school, to get a job, to start a job, and then to be successful in that job and get promoted in that job and then find the next job, right? These are all different sets of skills and different stages that you have in your life. And I think once you've gotten the job, right, or you're preparing for that job, you're trying to go out and you're seeking that job, there's certain sets of skills that you need. You have to demonstrate a certain amount of technical competency, especially in an IS field. They're going to expect that you have this technical foundation in some way, maybe highly specialized technical knowledge, depending on the domain that you're going into. As Maria said, you're going to be expected to know something about the business if you're in an IS type of position, so you should have some knowledge about that. So you're going to have some of these core skills that you've been learning in classes, right? This knowledge that you gain from classes. But there's also those soft skills that you need to get the job. I've talked to many technical companies and names that you would have heard of, and there's some companies who say, you know, if I can have the best developer there is, I don't care if they're a jerk. And I've heard other companies that say, if I have the best developer there is, but they're kind of a jerk, we don't want them. And so those soft skills that were shared at the keynote last night, those are things that matter in terms of helping you get the job and being prepared in terms of job readiness to find the job. You have to make an impression, you have to be professional, you have to be seen as someone that, I want to have an office next door to this person, or have a cubicle near this person, or interact with this person on a team. But then when you're actually getting to the stage to begin the job, it's a readiness and willingness to know that you're going to have to keep learning. College isn't the end of learning. You're going to be doing that throughout your entire career if you stay in IS, because everything's changing. The jobs that we have today didn't exist a few years ago in many of the fields that we're talking about. And the jobs that you might have in 10 years probably doesn't exist today. So you have to be ready and engaged, ready to keep learning, ready to be trained, ready to have an open mind. And that's part of readiness, is readiness to learn, to expand yourself throughout the process.
Thank you. I had the mixed blessing of being in charge of writing the report on our undergraduate program at the school I'm at, St. Louis University, about 3 years ago. Now, normally that's a what's called pro forma, just automatic. You just take all the statistics, download them, add a sentence at the beginning and end, and send it in. But we decided we really wanted to know how we were doing, so we had focus groups. We had focus groups with students, with recent graduates, and with employers of our recent graduates. And I think the most interesting was our interviews with the employers of recent graduates. And now, of course, a little of this is specific to our school, but what they said is that they were really happy with a lot of things that we didn't do much about, like teams and communication and things like that. But what they found is that the vast bulk of students had a real challenge in the first 3 to 6 months ramping up. And what do I mean by ramping up? Number one is the pace of life, at least for our students, shifted dramatically. That you're going from, 3 classes a week or 4 classes a week to starting at 8 and going till 5, and just the intensity of time management and being there that much was something. Second is, a lot of businesses has the philosophy in IT that we have to keep our programs so general because we don't know where you're going. And you could be going any of 100 places. So when we teach you database, we teach you database in general. But then you go to, a Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they have a specific database, a specific set of data, and a lot of stuff built on top of it. So the learning curve is not how to do database necessarily. You'll have that. Your advantage is you'll be able to walk in and understand in general what their database is. Then you'll be expected to learn the specifics of that place, how it works. And the soft skills that Stacey was mentioning means who is the person that's the bottleneck? Who do you need to talk to a lot? Who do you need to try to avoid? And these are not things that you can ask about very easily. In fact, you can look kind of dumb asking about it. Not dumb, but inappropriate. And, but it's things that you want to keep your eyes open to. I strongly suggest keeping a journal. When I was in grad school, I had 3 goals. They were overarching. One, I can't remember 2 of them, but one was international, to have some international experience. And I realized that I didn't have to go to Korea. I can meet a Korean student right in my program. And so once I started writing down every day, what did I do today to have an international experience? What did I do today to learn more technically? you don't even have to ever look at it again. It just focuses you on creating those experiences so that you can write them down. So those are my thoughts and tips.
Thank you. Now, you kind of got into what they should do. Is there anything within your universities that you notice that students are often neglecting in their journey of reaching job readiness goal?
You want me to start?
Yeah.
We don't have as organized a program of job readiness as some other schools. Like University of Virginia is noted from the day one as a freshman or a fresh person. You're starting to, learn how to do interviews and this sort of stuff. I think that it hopefully goes without saying that if you have, you guys are probably mostly ready to graduate, but if you have any time left to do an internship, even if it's just on campus, this gets you into that flow of addressing that you're creating value for somebody, that you're on a timeline. That's about it. I don't think we do much beyond that. We do a lot to get people ready to try to get a job. We do very little to prepare them for what happens once they have the job.
I think that's a common problem on a lot of campuses, or not necessarily a problem, but that's usually our goal, is we're helping you to get a job, right? That's what you want to know. Do I have to live in my parents' basement, or do I get to actually go out and live the life that I want to live and have a job and a career that I'm excited about? And so a lot of career services groups, they are really focused on helping you get the job. We have a great career management program at Baylor that we have all kinds of tools to help students interview, to help students build resumes, to see how they're being viewed in resume generators, to understand the micro expressions that they have during interviews, or if they're using filler words. I hear all these great stories about this great software that really helps them through the interview process. But I think where we hear from our employers that hire students, and I don't think this is unique to Baylor, I think this is common across many universities, is where students tend to flounder is kind of that maybe not recognizing that you're going to show up and not really know anything at that company on that first day. You come out of school thinking, yeah, I know something about my domain, but just as Fred mentioned, right, you don't know that company's way of doing things. So being ready to just be open to that it's okay to be the dumbest one in the room on the first day of work. That's okay, because that's why you're there. They're going to teach you. They're going to train you what they want you to know about their way of doing things. And if you try to fight that, or you're trying to prove that you're smart, I think you're going to have a much harder time than if you just accept the fact that I don't know it all yet. Yet is a powerful word in the English language, so remember that one, yet. I don't know it yet. You will know their way of doing things soon enough, but it just takes some time to get there. They'll teach you. That's what they want to do. They need a foundation. That's what college is preparing you. But to actually prepare you for a specific job within a specific organization, they're going to help to get you there. So don't fight it. Just be ready and willing to accept that you can learn from them along the way.
As Stacey was telling me, I thought of a few more things. One is, I think that the expectations of your comportment outside of work are real different than the expectations a school has. I mean, our school is pretty loosey-goosey. If you get in a little bit of trouble here or there, people want you to get back on the straight and narrow, but we expect students to slide, a bit, and so nobody's probably going to say this to you, but you will become a representative of your organization, and even if you're not aware of it, people will watch you and make judgments about your organization. Your organization is going to want to be proud and not have concerns. Second one, and I've never heard of this being done, but it just occurs to me. If I were graduating now, I would think about going back to the alumni organization, especially if you're staying in town. If you're graduating from UT here, UT Dallas, and you're staying in town, and see if there's 8, 10, 12 other people that as a graduate alumni service would want to have discussion groups and support group. The University of, Loyola University in Maryland does something like this for their MBA students. Most alumni groups are thrilled if somebody wants to do something that they don't have to do themselves. But I can't guarantee that. Ours can be pretty curmudgeonly. And the last I would say is, one of the things that nobody's going to talk to you about, and you probably studied a little bit in a very vague and abstract way, is culture. And in our school, we talk about culture in terms of international business, blah, 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 but culture is about the norms and expectations. These are unspoken generally. So keeping your eyes open for what these are, think as you start, if you're in your 20s and you start thinking about what cultures do I like? What influence do I have on the culture? I mean, you're not going to have much influence for a while, but if the culture is very upbeat and you like that, great. If it's slow and you'd like it to be upbeat, what can you do about it without alienating people? And how do you live within a culture you're not comfortable with and be successful? And how do you change a culture to be more like what you'd like? In the long run, I think these are questions worth asking and thinking about.
Thank you. Now, given, because IS is such a diverse major and there's so many different career paths that you can go down, how do you develop a curriculum that is helpful and relevant to everyone when it comes to job readiness?
I think this is a major challenge that we have as an IS field. And I think that's part of why sometimes it's hard to attract students sometimes to IS. I mean, even think about your own career goals or how you got to IS. I came here accidentally. I mean, I didn't dream when I was a kid of, I want to be an information systems professor or be in the field of information systems when I grow up. I never had that dream. I wanted to be a teacher. And then when I got older, I had an amazing science teacher. And then I wanted to work for the Centers for Disease Control and cure diseases. And then calculus came in college, and no, that wasn't going to be my career path. So then what did I do? I went to computer science. Not very smart if you don't feel competent in calculus to go into computer science, right? But I just always liked technology. I was the kid who spent my entire savings account on my first computer. I wanted to take apart my parents' computer because I didn't want to break mine. I just wanted to understand how it worked, right? I remember having books when I was a kid. So back in the days of DOS, right, before we had Windows, right? So I had books where I would just type line after line trying to get a program to work. So a little skateboarder guy would go across the screen, and it never worked. After I spent hours doing this, right? But I've always been interested in technology, but I never knew there was a career in that. No one had modeled that for me. I didn't know what that was until I just kind of fell into it, and it kind of seemed easy to me, and I kind of liked it, and I kind of always gravitated toward it. So I took another step, and then another step, and then I just ended up in information systems. And I think that's changing. My 12-year-old son now says he wants to be a programmer. I'm so excited, right, that I have an IT kid in my house. But a lot of people kind of fall into this profession, and you don't really know what it is you want to do. I mean, if my brother-in-law's an accountant, and that's pretty easy. You go to the accounting major to become an accountant. You don't really become anything else other than an accountant or an auditor of accounting if you're an accountant. If you're in marketing, you tend to do marketing. And I guess we get to do so many things. It's a double-edged sword, right? We can be anything we want to be. We can do work in marketing. We can actually help with accounting. We can, by being an IS auditor, we can do things in terms of project management. We can do analytics. We have so many career options, but that also is part of the problem. I'm gonna have a job in IS when that's not a job, right? That's not a career path. That makes it hard to kind of understand and identify who you are. But it's great because maybe I major in IS, but I don't quite know what I want to do. I still have a whole world ahead of me, and I don't have to switch majors as a result, right? If my brother-in-law decided, I really don't like debits and credits, there's nothing else left for him, right? He has to change majors. He's stuck. Luckily, he loves it. He's very successful. So I think that's part of the challenge of IS, and that's part of our challenge as faculty members developing curriculum, is trying to create programs that allow for this diversity of types of jobs that you can go into, whether you're supporting functional departments, whether you're in the IS department itself. So we do tend to, as mentioned earlier, we do tend to create pretty broad majors. We might have specializations within it. So, that's sometimes what we might say is we want to specialize in security or we want to specialize in analytics. But if we do that, then we lose out on students who go, but what if I decide I don't like statistics after a while? Then you're not really going to have a path in analytics if you hate math and statistics, right? So I think part of the beauty of IS is that we do get to keep it broad. We get to know a lot about the business. But at the same time, if you want to have those deep, technical, specialized skills in security, analytics, database, A lot of programs, we don't necessarily focus on that, or we might try to create tracks to give you some depth, but it might not be the same as if you were going into like a computer engineering program to get those really deep technical skills. So we are generalists as IS, which is great for all the reasons I mentioned, but it can also lead to some of that, like in the survey that was talked about, maybe some less assuredness of our technical skills as IS professionals, because we don't dive as deep into that. So if that's your passion, then you have to find a program that's more specialized in order to develop those skills. Or you can embrace the beauty of being able to know a lot about a lot of different things.
Thank you.
I'd like to approach it from a little different perspective. A while ago, a fellow named Capers-Jones investigated programming and other IS, what we would call IS, but he would call computer science type of careers. And it turned out he found 6 different types of employment. And interestingly, the word programmer meant something different in each of the 6, something slightly different in terms of what you actually did. The 6 were, and I'm trying to remember, I wrote it down, but I'm not sure I have them all. Games. Turns out there were actually more people working for software game companies than for any other category that he had, which is really interesting. We have a few game companies with offices in St. Louis, and some of our faculty are married to senior people there, so they come and give talks, and the students love these. It turns out, though, that if you like playing games, that's a good thing for designing games, but it's really different. I mean, designing a game is really different from playing one. You're building it for somebody else, and so you have to think about everything besides just how you can win. A back door so you can come in and win is not a bad thing. Sorry, I'm getting off track there. A second one is consulting. Many accounting firms, I don't even know what they are anymore, Ernst & Young and Cooper's Lybrand and all these others, hire people, and their job is different. If they program either for their own internal use, but mostly for clients. And programming for clients is like a real different business that you're in than programming for your own company. Software package producers hire a lot of programmers, for example, and analysts and whatnot. And that's real different. If you're working as a programmer at Microsoft, it's real different than at American Airlines. American Airlines, you're worried about keeping airplanes in the air. Microsoft, you're worried about satisfying general needs for lots and lots of clients. And the emphasis on interface and the emphasis on testing are really different at these places. In other words, outsourcing. You're receiving somebody else's work. Military, government, and nonprofit is another one. Typically, if you work for the military, government, or nonprofit, you will have less specialization. A lot of our students work for small companies and nonprofit companies, and they do everything. So they're not like a database person, they're like an everything person. And there are people who love, but it's a little of everything, not a lot of everything, if that makes sense. So some people love doing that, and they love being the one person everybody goes to. And the last one is what I call end user companies. We have a big beer company called Anheuser-Busch in town. We have Monsanto in St. Louis. A lot of you probably heard of it. We have Boeing. So these are companies that hire 1,000 or more IT people, and they'll have a whole bunch of different clusters of workers. And the clusters will include people in database, in networks, in security, in leadership, and in end user support, and others that aren't coming to my mind. So exactly what Stacey's saying, the amount of diversity is unbelievable. And so what you like doing, you can do more of on the job. I'll point out one more thing. The statistics are really heartwarming. I've lived through at least 3 cycles of ups and downs in IT. So when I started, it was 1980, and it was a recession. And during the recession, there were very few IT jobs. And then it boomed. And then year 2000, there was a big recession, and it fell completely apart. When I started teaching at St. Louis, I had 100 students in my systems class. They had to give me a room like this. The last one I did was about 80. And so IT and IT employment, IT in schools, it has been historically very cyclical. So you're blessed in a sense to be at a time when you have really good opportunities. You should be aware of, in my opinion, you should be aware of and thankful for that and really take advantage of it, knowing that there are people who might not. Therefore, it's also your responsibility, if and when the next downturn comes, to think about how you might help these people in IT in the trough continue and start their careers. It's down the road. You hopefully won't have to worry about that for a long time. But we were deserted by people in industry, in IT, twice. They will do anything for you until there were more people to work than they needed, and then they were gone. And that really hurt, in my opinion, the steady growth and experience of IT. And I think we have a residue of that, of a lot of people thinking that there aren't IT jobs, even though there are, because it's continuing. I'm sorry if I'm going on and on about this. I just think my uncle that I grew up with was an aerospace engineer, and he went back to school twice just in case there was a recession and he'd get let off. So in principle, learning more to be able to proactively do more interesting stuff is good, but continuing to learn more and to have a broader array of things that you can do is really essential to weather the downturns as well, in my opinion.
Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure that the panel has a chance to answer any particular questions that the audience has. Is there any questions?
Hi, I'm Risafa from Temple University, and I just had a quick question, like combining some points like you mentioned in the beginning. So Stacey, you said that like an IS degree kind of gives you a foundation for learning when you want to step out into the job field, and it's like different per company. And then like you also mentioned how like there's like a big aspect about culture fit. So what happens when you get to a company and you specialize and you learn their trade and you realize the culture fit may not be the best for you and you want to maybe make a change or make a move and you're already specialized in that company? Is there a specific skill or just anything in particular that you would recommend for being able to transition from their culture and also what they have taught you specifically into like a different company environment?
Yes. So I had a friend who said, no computer architect, no database architect is ever out of work, even in the downtimes. They may change jobs or be let go, but they have people waiting for them. So there are, security is probably like that. There are a half a dozen of these. Now the problem is a lot of people don't like doing these. They tend to be detailed. That's why they're so easy. So if you're security oriented, finding out what some of these things are and then getting into those is a helpful thing, even if they're not the most exciting or interesting, although they have their own interest when you get into them. But computer architecture, network design, database design, I would think things about virtualization are going to be like like the technology of cloud computing would be, and security. Did I say security already? Can't remember. The point is that there are 5 or 6 things. If you find the things that nobody wants to do but are really needed, they tend to be good. Now, you do need to be careful if you leave a job and go somewhere else to make sure you don't bring anything proprietary that is inappropriate with you. But the basic skills and basic knowledge. You also want to be careful on a new job not to say, well, the way we did it at American Airlines was, you people at Delta are idiots, right? You want to be a little bit, I think more people in IS move because they get better offers. Now, if it's not a cultural fit, if it's not egregious in the harassment sort of thing, that's obviously a reason to leave if need be. But if it's just people like to go slow and I like to go fast, then finding ways to accommodate and building your skill set at dealing with that culture is also good, and it will serve you at the new place too.
Yeah, I think to kind of build on that, and I think this is a great question, because I've lived that, where I've been in an organization where it just was not how I tended to operate. So I think part of it is, even though you're gaining specific skills for that company in terms of a specific technology and the way this company does things, you're still learning things at a more abstract level. If you can learn to kind of raise it up a level, and it's not just their implementation of this software for this process, but now if you can think about what you would put on a resume, like I developed a new planning process for accomplishing X, Y, and Z, that's a skill you take with you, whether or not it's in that specific company or not. You're still gaining useful knowledge that you might not use, or that even if that technology isn't used somewhere else, you're still learning things on a higher level. You're still gaining skills that you can take with you somewhere else. And so to this point about culture fit, so I'm a very structured person. So I get up at the same time, I tend to go to bed at the same time, I tend to eat at the same time, I tend to just, my life is a rhythm. When I start a class, we start off class with we start on time, we start with an agenda, we have action items at the end, we end on time, and life is structured. I work for a consulting company that was started by a bunch of friends from a high school. They all went to high school together. And so they tended to roll into the office about 10 or 11. They might go to a 3-hour lunch, and then they might work till 11 at night. They ended up starting to bring in video games, like arcade games, to the office, and so they moved someone out of an office just to fill it up with arcade games, which was quite cool, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want to live here. I mean, I have a life outside of this place. They didn't. They enjoyed that, but I didn't, and I wanted to, and so this is kind of that idea, having to like modify myself to fit that culture. So I created my own structure. They didn't have structure, so I made my structure. I came in around 8:30. I'd probably be there at 8. I could be there at 8:30. No one cares if I'm there at 8. I'm going to be the one opening up the office. So I'll come at 8:30. I'll leave by 4:30 or 5. I'll eat lunch at my desk. Like I could just kind of then create my own structure in this environment that had zero structure and would drive me crazy if I tried to impose my structure on them. If I tried to do that, that would not work. I would just go crazy. But me kind of finding my way to that path to create my sense of how I can cope in that situation, because it wasn't such a bad thing. Now, would I still be working there? I ended up quitting because I started my PhD. Would I still be working there today? Probably not. Like, I've gained skills, I could move on, I could find something that's a better fit. But it did also stretch me in a way that I wasn't expecting. I learned how to be a little more flexible than I was before, which was not a bad thing to learn too.
Thank you.
I kind of actually want to go off of your answer. Do you find that alienated you at all?
I was lucky in that there was one other person in my office, or a couple of other people in my office that we were pretty similar. And so they would tend to assign us to projects together. They would refer to us as the Wonder Twins. And because we just kind of thought about things in the same way. So in some ways it kind of bonded a couple of us closer together. But in some ways it was alienated. I wasn't invited to lunch. I wasn't invited to walk over to the ice cream shop across the street, you know, at 2 o'clock because I knew I'd be leaving in a couple of hours, right? And I probably already had lunch at my very regimented time when that was going to be. And so I think in some ways it did alienate me, and I think in other ways it brought me closer to certain employees. But that was another reason why I probably would not have stayed at that company long term. I would have never been promoted. Like, they wouldn't have thought of me in that way. I wasn't part of the crowd. And so I was also not part of the high school crowd. It was just a really unique culture. I mean, I wasn't part of that high school crowd. That just wasn't, I wasn't ever going to be part of the in crowd. Even if I was like them and stayed on the same schedule, I still probably wouldn't have broken into that crowd. So yeah, there are some consequences to that if you choose to deviate from the mold.
Thank you. Anyone?
I'm Michael. I'm here at UT Dallas. Actually, I started a consulting company in high school, so I can sympathize with that. But I was wondering, we see a lot of technologies like blockchain and AI. They seem to be very computer science focused right now. But as they mature, do you see a role for IT there? And if so, do you think that's something we should be kind of positioning ourselves for?
Do you mind?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you asked that. I just had a paper published. Stacy was the editor of the journal that published it. And it's about a natural progression that happens with every new technology, with every platform. I won't say every new technology because many technologies don't take off, but the ones that take off. There's a period of time when the technical skills are essential because you have to deal directly with the technology. Think about mobile. There was a time when you had to program directly in the phone. Okay? Then there's a second wave. The first wave never leaves. It's always a good skill. The second wave is building what we call bridging technologies that created the opportunity for other people to use the technology. So Stacy might be writing applications, and I'm writing technologies to make it easier to write applications. And then the third are people who don't know anything about the technology but can use the tools that in this scenario that I've made to now make their own apps. Okay? So you see how there's, and this happens with these in general. So blockchain is still expensive and it's still complicated. But people will start making, and as capacities grow and as people find shortcuts, assuming that it catches on. And I think there's some specialized uses that are enough, there's a good chance that those will extend out and become used in more normal things. Not more normal, but more everyday. So if blockchain were your thing and you were getting into it now, you could expect this sequence of skills and start anticipating. Now, if you're a faculty member, which it doesn't sound like you are, then you can start thinking about how am I going to get ready with the right tools in place to be teaching these end user skills for manipulating this. How do I start thinking about this with the emergence of an Internet of Things is another one like this, right? There's all kinds of techniques about how the devices communicate with each other, and they're just developing the protocols for this. But then they'll develop ways to implement the protocols without knowing what they are, and then ways to simply set up new programs without knowing anything about how the sensors work. So I think this is a really common progression, and you should be aware that these skills will emerge if the technology catches on.
And I think for an IS person, because you have the business side and the foundational side, and you have a richer view of the entire organization, you don't get lost in the coolness of the technology, right? You can start thinking about what's the value of the technology. Not just can we do it, but also should we do it? What are we unleashing Pandora's box if we actually do this technology and we do it in the way that the computer scientists want to do it, right? Like thinking through the process, the steps, the foreseen consequences and the unforeseen consequences as a result of it. How is it going to actually contribute to the organization? Not just are we jumping on a bandwagon that everyone else is doing. And I think IS majors are better positioned to kind of understand how the technology fits the business, as opposed to someone who's just excited to actually implement the technology or make it more efficient or make it more productive in some type of way.
And if you follow our logic, when something starts to emerge, you can think about inventing the bridging technology that can make you a lot of money, and that you can then think about your business. And it sounds like you have an entrepreneurial spirit. You can think about your what kind of a bridging technology would be. How do I build it? How do I charge people for it? And how do I sell that to people in terms of the good they can create by the new applications they're going to build themselves? I mean, it's a wonderful question. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Jackson from Temple University. You talked about specializations in IS, but how about double majors? Are there double majors that you see a lot of, and what kind of careers do you see them going to?
So, yeah, I think, so one thing that I used to do, I'm not as involved in teaching undergraduate students right now, but one thing that when I would always encourage students that they should double major in IS. And usually though, because they were interested in another functional area, and I would talk about how IS would complement that, right? So if you're interested in accounting, there's value in adding IS to that. If you're interested in marketing, there's value in adding IS to that. I think what gets a little different is if you're an IS person, you know, like you are that person, unlike me, that knows I am an IS person, and trying to decide, you know, should I double major? And I think there can be great opportunities in this, especially depending on what your goals are. I've worked with students before that will double or triple major because they're trying to get exactly, they know it, they have this vision of exactly what it is that they want to do. And, you know, so maybe they're like also majoring in a foreign language because they want to have that international experience. They might also be majoring in public policy because they want to do government work in IS in an international context. So I think there's going to be value to that, but I think there's also the challenge of if you've set yourself up, if you are that structured person like me, and you've set yourself up to be in such a specialized area, you will create some challenges if you're not open to flexibility about what it is that you're actually going to do with your career. You might be making yourself too narrow or too overqualified for some areas. So I'd say there is value in it, but I think you have to think strategically about what your personal goals are and how those degrees can help you reach those goals. And maybe a double major is the way to do it. There's also, we live in a world where there's so much free education online. You don't actually have to major in anything to get knowledge about it, right? So go to Khan Academy, go to Coursera, go to, you know, all these different online platforms where you can gain knowledge if you don't want to spend the extra time and money in a double major.
I'd say I would not advise people to do a double major unless they want to. But if they want to, it's a tremendously good thing. It's like an internship. So just one quick story. A student graduated of mine in the height of the Depression after the, not Enron, the other one, the bank, Lehman Brothers and all this stuff in 2008. She had a double major in finance and IS. I said, what do you want to do? She said, pure finance. Why did you do IS? Because it's interesting to me. Okay. She was one of 200 people who applied for one job in New York in the finance industry. She was the only one with a double major in IS. She's the only one they interviewed, and they hired her at a very good salary. Now, what they wanted her to do is be the IS person in the finance department, help buying new equipment, teaching people how to use it, and all this stuff, which she could do as a startup and get to know people until she could go into what she really wanted to do, which is be like a financial analyst and a trader and stuff. Still, it got her in the door, and it wouldn't surprise me if after a year or two, she took over their whole mainframe system or something, you know. So I think the old rule of thumb was that there are no IT people. There are only people who do marketing and accounting and whatnot. That's more true in the end user, things like Anheuser-Busch or Boeing. It's not so true in the software development, like Microsoft or games. But in any case, it's rare that IS doesn't exist alongside some of this, unless you're doing the pure infrastructure. And I'll say a couple of quick things. If you have choices about your job role, one of the fastest ways to learn and do really well is to become a tester. And testers look at everything. Now you have to be a little bit mean, because if you remember, testing is not debugging. Your job is not to fix things, it's to break them. So you have to love pulling weeds more than harvesting tomatoes, if you see what I mean. I love pulling weeds. I hear the little things cry when I pull them out of the ground. It's better than being really cruel, if you see what I mean. The point is that it's a great job and you learn a ton. Another one is systems analyst, where you're getting assigned lots of different projects across the whole organization. And the IT specialists who know how information flows have a lot of potential power in organizations and in business. Most of us don't use it because people are altruistic generally, don't go into IT for power. You know, political science or, ROTC or something. I don't know if that's true, I just made that up. The point is that information is power, or knowledge is power. And so at least that's the cliche. And so you can think about it that way. Double major, I see no way it can hurt you if you have the time and energy. The difference would be having two majors versus having a major and then a lot of independent things just because you're interested in them. Or not having any of that, just barely graduating because that's all you can do. We have a guy who wants everybody to have to take an internship at our school. I say, some people, it's like enough just to graduate. It's not as easy for everybody. Or they have, 20 hours a week of work that they're doing. Or they've got PTSD because they just come back from, a military assignment. So I think that an internship and a double major are never bad as long as you can handle the effort that goes into it.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I want to give another round of applause to
Any pre-questions? What are you guys looking to get out of this? Because I can tailor this to whatever you're looking for. I'm going to come to it from the basic of the technology, what the industry looks like. Is there anything else you guys are really looking for?
No, you do cryptocurrency.
So yeah, focusing on the cryptocurrency, kind of how that's working. All right, gotcha.
Smart contracts.
Okay, for sure. I think I have that in here too. And by the way, these are not my slides. These are Cody Bailey.
Really just how the blockchain translates from cryptocurrency to like information sharing.
Perfect. All right.
Have you ever seen it used to verify the legitimacy of an email or something like that?
I have seen, yes, I've seen people I don't know if I've seen specifically email, but I have seen messages where they have used it to verify whether a message is correct. They'll actually put it on a blockchain. They'll have it time-stamped, and they'll say it came from this person who has, signed something with a private key. They've proved it's them, and they can do that through Twitter.
So
Actually,
the need for encryption, for messaging, but
yeah, I think
legitimacy.
I don't think it was. I can't remember if it was blockchain or not, but I do know that Julian Assange has used it to tweet out of the Ecuadorian embassy to let people know that he's in fact still alive.
Huh.
So that has been a use case, and so.
Wow. Instead of public key.
I think it was using he was using public key encryption, but I don't know if it was blockchain related. But it's certainly something you can use a blockchain, and I've seen people discuss that as a use case.
And hoping that someone would come up with that as the spouse of a realtor whose emails get spoofed all the time.
Yeah, it's definitely. I think identity is going to be a big player. We're going to see a lot of
product opportunity.
Yeah, well, there's some people working on it right now, but they're not doing a particularly good job because it's a startup space. And there's a lot of people getting recruited out of hackathons that don't really know what they're doing. So they get to the point where they have a really cool looking product, but as for it actually working outside of demos, we still need that. Good? All right. So my name is Michael Llewellyn. I run the blockchain club here at UT Dallas. I'm a computer science student. I'm a junior. I've been doing cryptocurrency consulting and blockchain for the last 5 years. Started out mining on some spare computers, really started from an IT perspective, setting up people's wallets, getting them secure. In the last couple years, it started to move more into corporate consulting, software development, things like that. As the space has improved, it has come from crypto anarchists and people trying to buy money off the dark web to people that are actually looking to implement this in the industry in a wide case. So it's been quite a strange growth. It's definitely something that I think the first UT Dallas startup for cryptocurrency didn't go very well. That was Ross Ulbricht in the dark web, but it did get Bitcoin on the map. It was really the first strong use case, and now we're at a place where central banks are now discussing how this might be implemented on a large scale, cryptocurrency and blockchain otherwise. So first thing I'll talk about is what is blockchain. So we have a definition here from William Moe. I can't actually say that. Blockchains are new technology layers that rewire the internet, blah, 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 blah. At its core, a blockchain injects trust. That's probably the biggest word, is trust. The biggest issue we've had with the internet in the last 2 decades is the fact that we have a great way to share information. We can share buttloads of information. I can look at the entire history of the human race through Wikipedia from my phone. Like, that's not something that people that 20 to 30 years ago could do. They had to go to the library, they had to order it, they had to go through an encyclopedia. Now it's instantaneous information. The information we get, however, is not trusted. There's no way for us, the only thing we can do is we can trust that hopefully the domain that we're going to, google.com, wikipedia.com or wikipedia.org actually, that it's actually trustworthy. There's always an issue where professors don't like to see Wikipedia articles in your research paper because they fear that, well, someone might have edited it and it might not be legitimate. So there's a big issue with trust. And so that's a very simple example. A stronger example would be all the hacks we've seen, Equifax, Target. Anytime you're trying to exchange information online, trusting it is a very real issue. And payments has been the worst part of this. We're still using legacy payments. The things, credit cards, they came up with those in the 80s, and that was not meant to be something you used online. It was meant to be something you just use a card in a store. And now we're trying to exchange these credit card numbers online, and if the credit card retailer is illegitimate, or if someone is listening to your conversation, if you're going through Wi-Fi, say, through a public mall, and someone else is listening on that Wi-Fi, they get your credit card information, and then you're out of luck, and you have to get a new credit card. And hopefully you don't You know, luckily credit card companies have been pretty good about challenging these frauds. But it also really sucks from a retailer perspective because it means that suddenly, hey, someone pays for an item online, I don't know who they are, I don't actually know if they have the right credit card, and guess what? Now being charged back because he says, oh, this was a stolen credit card, and you, the retailer, are out of luck. You lost $200, you already shipped them the product. That sucks. Not only that, when you're working through PayPal and credit card companies, there isn't an instant settlement. You're waiting 30 to 60 days for the funds to actually come into your bank, and in that time you can't use that money to then build more products to then sell. So there's a lot of friction in the current payment system and in the current information system that we have online. So where does blockchain come in? Why is it a potential solution for all these problems? Well, it gives us a way to trust one another without going through an institution. I don't have to trust PayPal, I don't have to trust a bank, I don't even have to trust the United States government. I just have to trust the code and the cryptography. That's all. So at its core, it's really just about trust. And the way it works is very much, you say it's a blockchain, think of a ledger. Think of a ledger book, it's an accounting book, and you just have a list of every single person's account and how much they owe. And imagine that every single page of this ledger is a block. And the binding, the book, is the chain. So this is basically, as every page goes through and you add in new accounts and new transactions, you're adding on, every page is a new block. And so if we're talking about the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the first real blockchain use we've seen, started out in 2008, and the real use case it had was using this blockchain, we can keep an accounting of every single person's account. It's literally just, here's your account number, here's the amount of Bitcoins you own, that's all it does. It's a pretty dumb database. That's all I can keep track of. But it does it very well because we can actually trust that it's doing it correctly. I can trust that you can trust me actually, when I send you 20 Bitcoin, that I actually have 20 Bitcoin because you can check and look at your copy of the ledger and see, oh, you do in fact have 20 Bitcoin. If I don't have 20 Bitcoin, you're not going to accept that transaction. The network won't accept that transaction because I can modify data on my own computer easily. So I can modify mine to say I have 100 Bitcoin. But if everyone else's copy says you don't have 100 Bitcoin, that doesn't do me any good. So that's a real strong use case of blockchain. So the way that a blockchain works in a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin is that it is distributed to every single user. Every single node in the network that is sending transactions also has a full copy of the blockchain that goes all the way back to 2008 to the Genesis block that was first mined when the network was started. So you know how much every single person owns. And so you know that if someone sends you a transaction, that it's legitimate or not. And the way that these transactions are then added, so how do we have this lovely ledger, and we have a bunch of accounts in them, how do we actually keep track of the new ones? When people make a transaction, how do we put that into the ledger and make sure that it's done properly? Well, that's where the miners come in. The miners are essentially the validators. They are the maintainer of the ledger. And what they do is they come in and they gather all the transactions that have occurred over 10 minutes in the case of Bitcoin, because some blockchains have different cycles. But in the case of Bitcoin, 10 minutes, they gather all the transactions together, they check every single one, and they see, do you actually have these many Bitcoins according to our copy? If they do, they get processed, they get confirmed. If not, they get thrown out. They're a double spend attack, and that never goes through. Now the issue is, of course, what if the same guy who's validating is also the same guy that's trying to cheat you? So he's trying to be a validator, he's trying to process these transactions, and at the same time he's also sending a transaction that he doesn't have the Bitcoin for. And he's going to lie and he's going to say he does because he's the validator. Well, that's why you see all these miners with, instead of just running it off a standard computer, they have these massive servers that are running it, and they have to process a lot of computation. And what that computation is it's actually just a really big number they have to guess. But the reason they have to guess it is because you don't want just anyone validating it. You want someone who has a vested interest in this system to be the one processing transactions. And so the people that do these transactions, the people that have to put a lot of effort into guessing the right number every 10 minutes to actually mine a block, they're the miners, and in return for putting in a lot of computation and a lot of resources, they get rewarded with both new Bitcoins that are created every 10 minutes at a steady supply rate, and they are also given transaction fees that are paid over those 10 minutes as well. Those transaction fees are completely voluntary. You can attach whatever transaction fee you want to a Bitcoin transaction. You can attach none. The reason we have transaction fees is because there is a limit to how many Bitcoin transactions go into every block. It used to be 1 megabyte limit. Now it's a 2 megabyte limit. But the issue is, well, if there's only so many spots in a block and more transactions than that, how do you choose? Well, most miners choose the ones that have the highest fees because they get the highest fees. So that's the way it's working so far. There's a couple issues with that, which is, of course, well, the richest people get to put their transactions through and the people that can't afford them don't. And that was an issue where I think a couple months ago we actually had transaction fees up to $20 per, which is ridiculous when you think about the fact that this is something we're supposed to be paying for regular goods online with. We've since managed to cut that back down to below $1, but it was an issue where it's a decentralized system, and the way that transactions get processed are practically on a market basis of who's going to pay me the most to process a transaction. So that was the biggest issue they ran into, where that's something that we're still trying to solve as far as making sure that we can actually process enough transactions every 10 minutes to make our scalable. Because right now Bitcoin's like around 3 transactions a second. Visa's like 10,000 transactions a second. Like you're not going to put Visa out of business at that level. But if you believe in Moore's law, then eventually that problem will be solved. And that's something that we'll spend years on this problem, I'm sure, and people are already looking for solutions. Payment channels are one of those solutions, and that's something that we can talk about after this, but I won't get into it. But that is a potential solution of, let's make our own blockchain and then do transactions there and then move on to the main chain. But now that I've kind of told you about blockchain, and I've told you about Bitcoin, which is really the first use case of a cryptocurrency keeping track of things. But that's cool and all, but that's a really dumb database. Like it just keeps track of numbers, essentially, how much each account has. A couple people, after Bitcoin came out and Bitcoin started gaining steam, looked at this blockchain and they said, well, this is really cool. I want to do more than just keep track of money. Like that's easy. Any accountants can do that, and we just have a system now that does it automatically. Great. What about all this other data? What about voting? What about personal information? What about healthcare data? What about supply chain? All these great use cases of why don't we make this blockchain a little bit smarter? Well, that's where Ethereum came in. Ethereum was designed as a decentralized platform for smart contracts, applications that run as programs. So this was thought up by this crazy Ukrainian whiz kid named Vitalik. And basically he looked at Bitcoin, he said, we can do more. We don't have to just upload transactions, we can upload code. So what he did is he put together this platform and he helped create this programming language, because this was very much a strong effort of everyone in the Ethereum Foundation. But he looked at this and he said, all right, let's create a programming language where we compile it down to bytecode, we upload it to a blockchain, and then anyone can run it on that blockchain. And that's quite incredible, because when you normally, on the current internet infrastructure, everything goes through a server. It goes through a central server. And if that server goes down, that service is gone. That's why DDoS attacks are so difficult, is because it's a central point of attack. I can take down anyone, even Google, if I have enough resources. And some people, what they'll do is they'll go out and they'll install viruses on thousands of computers, and they'll have every single computer then coordinate and attack a single source, just with random pings, overload it with data, and shut it down. And this was something that we saw, I think particularly in 2013 and 2014, there was a lot of the anonymous guys. They were going around shutting down anything they thought just sucked. And it was a terrible thing we had on the internet, because it's just like, well, if anyone can essentially commit cyber terrorism and take down websites, then it's just not a very good, secure platform for us to put important things on. We can't trust the internet to always be there if anyone can take down a website. What you have with Ethereum is you have a program out there that is not on a central server, it is on a blockchain. And that blockchain is on every single person's computer that is a part of that network. And so it doesn't matter if you take down the original creator, it doesn't matter if you take down 10 of their nodes, it's still going to be out there and running as long as there's one node connected to the internet and communicating. And so that's very powerful if you want to get programs out there that are very important. Secondly, other than censorship and downtime, you also have third-party interference. You have to trust an institution and their code to be legitimate. If PayPal is going to be processing transactions, I have to trust that they actually are doing them legitimately, which we normally trust them because they're regulated and they go through the paperwork. But at the same time, there's an issue of, if there's an employee there that is committing fraudulent acts inside the company, if there is an issue of their software is just not working and something's going wrong and I can't prove that they have my money if they say they don't, if I haven't keeping good records. So what you have with Ethereum is these smart contracts out there are open. They're open source. I can see all of the code out there, and this is code that is directly managing money. Because Ethereum is also a cryptocurrency. It has a cryptocurrency on its platform. And so if I manage this cryptocurrency using a smart contract, I can see exactly what's going on. And so this is simple for, I can put all my money into a smart contract, and then I can tell my lawyer, hey, when I die, call a smart contract with a private key that only you have, and maybe he and another lawyer or next to kin also has to provide a key so the lawyer can't just run off with my money to a non-extradition country. So what that does is suddenly, as soon as I die, the money, as soon as the keys are provided, will immediately go to my next of kin in exact amounts that I specified, in the exact ways that I said, and in a way that really can't be disputed by anyone, especially if this is recognized as a legally valid way to distribute funds, which is something the Delaware project is actually working on. They're working on a way for smart contracts to be integrated into the legal system and to be considered legal code, essentially. And so once you get past that, and those are very simple use cases and very simple programs to write, you can start writing more complicated programs, like let's say a marketplace, an entire marketplace where you and I, or thousands of people, can come online and we can trade directly with people in the same way that you do on the New York Stock Exchange, except I never give custody of my funds to a single damn person. So right now, you've got to trust your brokerage account. And that's not FDIC insured. You get a little bit of an interest rate, and you get to trade on it. But there's a risk, and that was a risk we got to see in 2008 when a lot of margin calls came through and some brokerages didn't quite have the funds to cover it. With this, there is no third-party risk. I don't give a damn what your credit rating is because I can trade with you directly. All I have to do, using a blockchain system, and there's a project called 0x that is doing this right now, where they've built a protocol where anyone can come in, use the smart contracts they have created, and they can go out and they can make their own marketplace. So anyone, not only are there people doing this, but there is an open source platform for anyone to do it that can understand how to plug into it. And so there's a plug and play marketplace out there now, and there's real value being traded. These things are live right now. The volume is very low because there's not a lot of people that understand the technology enough to utilize it, but as time goes on, I think this is something we'll see be used more and more often, and I think this is something that we'll potentially see use cases for things other than cryptocurrencies. We'll see them for stocks, we'll see them for bonds, we'll potentially see them for just normal goods and services that might be out there, commodities, futures. Because the biggest issue that we had in our market in 2008 was that we couldn't see the credit risk. We had no goddamn idea what was going on because they didn't, they didn't even know what was going on. Like, they were trying to figure out and value these assets on their books when, as soon as the market tanked, they realized they didn't know, they couldn't even value their own assets. They were trying to look through their books, and it would take months to go by block, all these mortgages, all these homes, and try to figure out what the hell they were worth. And you can't sell these things in that kind of a market if you can't value them. With this system, you can see everything. You can see everything that's going on. You could see that credit exposure, the amount of risk that these people were taking that they weren't quite aware of in real time. Anyone could look through and they could see that. And that's something that the commissioner, the chairman of the Commission of Futures and Exchanges, went in front of Congress and he said this. He was saying, if we had a blockchain system, we would have seen the credit risk in real time and we could have responded in real time instead of really spending months trying to figure out what was going on and really just having a hard time reacting to it because they simply didn't know how to do so. And we probably wouldn't have seen, I think the big solution to that was we give the banks a lot of money so they don't go under and pull us with them. And in this kind of scenario, this is something where you can more accurately determine what needs to be done. You don't have to give banks essentially a blank check to keep running. And more importantly, you can punish them accordingly when they do act against personal interests. And most importantly, you don't have to trust banks if you don't want to, because you can engage directly with people rather than going through an institution, because if you can get the smart contract to run well enough and on a blockchain
then you can engage directly with people in the same way you would in an institution. So you get all the perks of an institution without the liability. That's the biggest thing with smart contracts and blockchain. So now suddenly we have really all these perks. Now we're looking at, all right, how are we actually going to do this, you know? So it's really trying to figure out the virtual and the physical world. We've kind of been building up this virtual world of goods and services, of identity, of reputation. You know, well, how does the current president legislate? He does it through Twitter. And so, well, if the president is basically making all of the most important decisions through a Twitter account, it suddenly becomes very important that, you know, one, the Twitter account never goes down, that the Twitter account is, we know it's actually coming from Trump, because guess what? What if he tweets, what if someone hacks his account and then says, we're going to war with North Korea? North Korea might say, we're going to go to war. And so you want to make very well sure that if Trump's actually going to go with war, if he's actually going to go to war with Korea, you at least know that it's him saying it, you know? So that's really the importance that we're seeing, is that we need to know, the more we trust the internet with both our identities through social networks, you know, whether that's through LinkedIn. Here's an issue with LinkedIn, is you have some people, they can claim to work at your company and you don't actually employ them. That's an issue I have with cryptocurrency consulting, is that a lot of people have come out calling themselves cryptocurrency consultants and say, yeah, I work at cryptocurrency consulting, and I own the company, and they don't actually work with me. And I'm like, LinkedIn, you guys got to get, you know, because LinkedIn's an open profile where you can say whatever you want. I'm like, LinkedIn, you need to get these guys, like, to stop saying they work for me. So if you had a blockchain system where basically the only way they could work, they can say they work for someone, is that they are basically issued the identity from me. I have a private key, I can issue them an identity and say, they work for me, they work for me. And anyone else that doesn't have a key obviously does not work for me. So that's something that, you know, a very simple use case on LinkedIn is where we can start using identity to actually make sure that, you know, people are who they say they are, and we don't have to spend, you know, for things that we need to be trusted, I don't have to spend a lot of time going through the normal methods of, you know, just look, you know, there's a lot of things where if you want to trade cryptocurrency now, and you want to sign up for an account that handles USD, that converts it between that and dollars, you go through AML and KYC compliance, and that means you got to take a picture of your driver's license or your passport, you got to send them copies of your utility bill with your current address, you've got to, you know, sometimes they'll look up your credit history and you have to answer them a lot of questions. If there was I have a personal identity that already has all those things attached to it, and all I have to do is just give it to them and give them access to it, then wham bam, I just have to scan a QR code and then I'm in. And I have the same level of security that might take me like 1 or 2 weeks to get verified for, I can do instantaneously. So these are the strong use cases we see for blockchain, is basically being able to trust people and do it very quickly and expediently, because now it is in code. It's not because some person said it, because an institution said it, or because a piece of paper in a courthouse said it. It's because it's on a public blockchain that anyone can see. So these are some of the strongest use cases I see for blockchain going forward. So yeah, here's some good examples. Current world, centralized government, decentralized transparent government code. So we can actually build an entire organization where all the proposals, all the governance, all the voting occurs on a blockchain. This is something we're actually working on in Dallas. There's an organization called the NTBA, North Texas Blockchain Alliance. We're a nonprofit. We just engage with the community. We incubate startups. We work with students, such as the club that I have. And they've actually put together a project where they want to run the entire organization through a DAO, through a decentralized government. And the way that would work is essentially we establish, when we vote, for a president, a treasurer, and a secretary, all on chain. And then every proposal that we want to issue, we can just someone can propose it through their private key, put it on the chain, and any of us can look at that and say yes or no. And we can publicly see who says yes or no. Everyone knows that their vote was counted honestly. And we can even, if we're using cryptocurrency, process our funding directly through that, where you only have access to these funds if the decentralized government has given you access to them. And they can very specifically say how much and what for, and if you're doing it. And this is a long-term use case where, in the future maybe we're all using cryptocurrency. I could actually see what you're using it for, because this is all on a blockchain, and I see you go out and you buy posters and you buy food for an event and all that thing, and I can see that you're doing it properly. So if you go out and you spend it on hookers and blow, I see that and I say you're not supposed to do that. no money for you. Digital assets is something I already talked about. Right now, cryptocurrencies are kind of a weird digital asset where their big thing is scarcity. You know, there's only so much Bitcoin. That's where its value is derived. But you know, there are other things we can start putting on chain. One fun one is here. I can pull that one up real quick. Is CryptoKitties. Who's here heard of CryptoKitties? Yeah, CryptoKitties are great, man. So CryptoKitties are kind of like the Pokemon Go phenomenon, except you actually get kind of a cryptocurrency blockchain aspect to it. So what someone did is they started putting together these cute little cats. Start meow. All right, let's go. We're not going to install MetaMask. That's too much work. But here's all these cats, and basically what the thing is that these cats are all owned on a blockchain. These are all cats that you actually can own. I can say I own this, and if you go to the website, let's go to this guy right here, and let's see who owns it. This guy owns it. So we can actually see his address, his public crypto, the cryptography behind it. That's the public address. That's essentially his account number. So we know he owns. Oh wow, he owns quite a few cats. He's really into it. And then we can actually see that this cat is actually for sale, 0.0029 Ether. God, how much is that in US dollars? I really wish they would convert it, but you know, basically anyone can go on here and they can sell their cat. And there's actually cats in here that people consider quite rare and have traded for upwards of $100,000 for a picture of a cat on a website. But something that you can say you own. And in order to sell it to someone else, you don't go through PayPal, you don't go through the CryptoKitties LLC, you go directly through a smart contract. And the funny thing about these cats is that you can actually breed them. You can actually say this cat and this cat, they're going to breed on chain and they're going to produce this cat. So you can actually breed cats on chain. So the cool thing about this is, all right, it's very cool as a gimmick and it's a good start to trying to manage assets on chain. But what happens when we want to do bonds and stocks and other things? Well, this is very cool because suddenly we have a way to issue them in a way that everyone controls their own asset rather than going through a brokerage. And they can see everything that's occurring on chain and they can trust that something is secure. So an example of this right now is Berkeley is working on doing municipal bonds on chain. They are actually going to try and issue municipal bonds for the city through a blockchain system, and then anyone can participate in that. So there are two big pros to that. One, a municipality does not have a lot of money to issue bonds. And so normally they'd have to go through a financial broker. They'd have to go through someone that understands the process. With this, there's a lot more plug and play. With a bank, the entity just comes up and they say, this is how much I want to issue, this is how much money I need, this is how it should be managed, this is how the payout should go. And you can program all that into a smart contract, you can issue it, and then anyone can come in and buy it. And then the great thing about that is when residents want to participate in their own municipal bond offering, they don't have to be an institutional investor. They can go to a website that says, here's the bonds, here's how much they're worth, here's a cryptocurrency address you send, and we'll send back the bonds directly to you. And that can all occur within 10 minutes. So that's one of the strong use cases that we're seeing of, we have all these assets on chain, we can now manage them. And the thing is the biggest use case for these things are not going to be the Fortune 500 companies. It's not going to be Apple and Google issuing things on blockchain because they already have enough money to do it through a legacy system. It's going to be people in third world countries. It's going to be governments that either can't be trusted because they're all terribly corrupt, or they just simply don't have the money to employ a competent financial institution to do it for them. So like Nigeria, I mean, even the competent financial institutions aren't always the best, because I remember there was an issue with Libya letting Goldman handle their funds, and that did not go well. So this is something where suddenly a government not only has more control of their funds, but they can do it for far cheaper, and the people themselves can actually trust that the government is acting responsibly. Where are we? Proprietary silos, open source transparency. That's just the idea that everything that we're doing can be done open source. It's not going to be proprietary. Is not always the best way to go. This is actually a big source of contention in the blockchain community right now, because we have two platforms coming out. We have Ethereum, which is the open source cryptocurrency version of a blockchain. We also have other companies coming out with Hyperledger. It's open source, but it is backed by IBM, and the idea here is that companies can create their own private chains internally. This has been a very strong use case for supply chain, where companies want to keep track of an asset as it goes from one port to another. They want to have IoT devices out there that are tracking climate data, that are tracking who opened the container and when, things like that. Where they just basically, they want to know exactly what's happened to their product at every point, and so when there's an issue with the quality, or there's an issue with the price, or there is an insurance claim, the data is all there and it's all verified and it's something that we can trust. But this is a big source of contention right now because the open source community wants everything out there. They want everything public because they think that's the best way forward. And there's a lot of companies coming out and saying, we'd rather have it on a private chain. We don't necessarily want everyone to see what our financials are, what our supply chain is doing. We'd rather keep that to ourselves. But they can share it with insurance companies, they can share it with their partners, and they can employ kind of some of the decentralized aspects without completely being decentralized. They can say, only these nodes can participate. So that's an interesting dynamic we're seeing. I would compare it kind of to the intranet versus internet, where a lot of companies in the 90s had an intranet because one, the internet was very slow and having your own meant you could scale a bit easier. And then, two, you want to keep things private. Well, now we're in a world where the internet is far faster and people are putting things on the cloud and they're going directly through the internet. So that's something we might see where we have private blockchains for the next 5 to 10 years, but as public chains become more scalable, they can process more transactions, you might see a shift over to that completely. Maybe. We'll see. Go for it.
How do you see this affecting health insurance as well as like hospitals and things like that? Because one of the things that I know in insurance is that we don't have very much transparency in what we see in terms of a bill versus what everyone else sees. Do you see blockchain affecting that?
I think the biggest use case for blockchain in healthcare is going to be the data, the public data that someone, I go to a doctor, he records things about my health, about my well-being. Those are things I don't necessarily want to share with other people, but other doctors might need to know. And so sharing that public data can sometimes be messy. People can sometimes lose their data because they trust a centralized database that isn't well managed. There's been a lot of cases of that. What I see with the blockchain is a case where I can own that data personally through a private key, and I can partition out access to whoever I wish. Now that can include my doctors. That can also include health studies, where I say, if you give me $10, I'll let you look at my data and compare it with the rest of them. Issues like that. And then when it comes to health insurance companies, is something where the health insurance company can trust what your health status is, and they can trust it a little bit more than just trying to go through individual doctors. And then on the flip side, where you see these, the financials of how much does it cost versus how much am I paying, that's something that's going to be a little bit harder to force because that is going to require the insurance company and the hospital to be putting what they're doing on chain, and they might not want to do that. But at the same time, you do have the ability for insurance marketplaces to be operating openly, and you could have competitors that come out and they say, we're going to do this entirely on chain, and we're going to offer better rates and cheaper rates because a lot of our a lot of the friction and a lot of the processing is going to be done automatically by smart contracts, so we can charge far cheaper rates. And then, yes, they can be open and they can say exactly what you're paying for. The way I think I see it doing best is where basically, you don't get a good price with the hospital unless you're part of an insurance company because they get that bulk discount. This is a way where people can gather together and en masse say, we are as a group going to deal with you as a hospital, maybe to a slightly institutional level where there is someone in charge, there is a company running it, but it can be far more decentralized, more like a credit union, and they can basically say, we're going to deal with you directly and we want to have a better rate. And that's something they can do without being part of an insurance company that might have higher premiums.
Quick one here. So once you provide your insurance provider or your healthcare provider with the information in the blockchain, it of course can be rebundled and then resold as the data is currently being illegally sold today, correct?
Yes. Okay. So the way that you could stop that, and you can't stop people from getting the data and selling it, but you can verify who actually owns it. So what you can do is you can take every single bit of data that you have out there and you can hash it to a single hash, and you can put that on your public identity and say, this data is mine. And if anyone else, if you're buying from anyone else that says they have this data, know that it's mine and know that it's illegal, and what you're doing is illegal. That's the biggest use case of, you can't stop people from doing things illegal, but you can at least make it known that it is illegal.
It's like copyright.
Yeah, exactly.
So in the process of sharing your information, let's say with your healthcare provider, or even you mentioned like sharing your identity in a process of trying to transfer, trying to exchange funds. Is that as simple? Are you giving someone your private key, or is there some other way that you're giving them access to your information?
What you'll do is using your private key without exposing it to anyone but yourself, you'll sign a transaction that says this person, this public address, will have access to these things that I have given them.
Okay.
And so the private key, the way that public private key encryption works is that with a private key, you can produce a public key, but a public key cannot produce a private key. And so I can always prove I own something with a private key, but looking at the public key, no one can then get the private key.
Right.
And so it's a good way of having people then verify things. And the biggest issue we have now is people are not used to the idea of private keys and kind of the absolutism of if you lose it, it's like cash. It's gone. You're not getting it back. There are ways that people are looking into, especially in the identity side, how can, if you lose your private key, then you can designate a couple people who are your friends or who are institutions that say, okay, we'll issue a new identity with a new private key. So that's something that I think we're developing. But for now, like especially in cryptocurrency, yeah, if you lose your private key, like it's done. And that, whether someone steals it and then moves the money out of your wallet, or you just lose it entirely, and the money just sits there in that wallet until the end of time because no one can guess the private key.
So by contrast, that is actually one of the advantages of having a third party in charge. So when
Yes.
you lose losing your password for your email, you can say, I forgot my password, and they'll send you a new one.
Yes.
Versus on a blockchain, once you lose it, it's gone.
Yeah, and I think the way we're going to solve that is we're going to have different layers of chains and different systems operating on these blockchains where the base layer is absolute, you lose your private key, you're done, but you can participate in systems that will also allow you to get new private keys. So I can be part of a subset of the Ethereum blockchain where someone is actually managing it. And they can say, and if I lose my funds, they can track that person down, they can see where the funds were stolen and return them to me because they have control of this network.
Okay.
But I can leave this network anytime and go back to the main chain. So it's like basically I can operate in almost a bank apparatus on chain, but then I can move back to a cash environment whenever I wish.
Okay.
Which is a big issue right now because banks don't like cash. The Indian government's been they canceled one of their bills. People had a month to exchange it for different denominations. There's been a lot of banks discussing the idea of cashless societies, outlawing cash, or just simply not accepting it anymore. And the big issue with that is suddenly, well, you can only trust institutions now with your money, and if they're misbehaving, like there's not much you can do. If they're colluding as a group, if they're as a group just not being responsible with your money, you can't do anything. There's no alternative. Whereas with this, you can participate in anything you wish, but there's always a main chain you can go back to where you can handle the funds directly, if you need to. Especially in like a 2008 environment, where you can pull your money out of the fund, get out, and know exactly what you own and where. More questions? I think we're at that point, it seems. Or I can keep going through the list, whatever you guys want.
Where do you see the space with cold storage like hardware wallets, like a Ledger, going in the future?
I think they're going to be very big. I as a consultant, I've worked with Ledger, I've worked with Trezor, set clients up on them. I mean, I've got guys that come into a Starbucks with $1 million on Trezor. And I have to manage it for them. Like, well, dude, you really trust me? Like, be careful. Don't trust anyone else this much. You shouldn't be trusting me this much. But, these are guys that are in their 60s, they're retired. And they saw cryptocurrency and they got lucky and they have a lot of funds now. And so I just try to help them manage them as best I can. But yeah, I think those hardware enclaves where you don't have to trust your computer, you don't have to try and keep it disconnected from the internet, you have this little USB device that you know for sure your private keys are on. And it's something you can stick in a safe, know it's secure, you can have backups of it as well. It's a good system where there's a lot of security precautions that you force people to take automatically using that system. And the really cool thing about the Ledger specifically is that same system I was talking about with decentralized exchanges, like 0x, they actually have integration for Ledger, where I can trade directly on a decentralized marketplace. I can exchange Ether for other cryptocurrencies, all from my Ledger. my private keys never leave this hardware device, but I can trade openly on the marketplace without ever, basically putting my funds at risk or my private keys at a risk of being stolen. So yeah, I think that's going to continue to be developed. It's early stages right now. I think there's a lot of competitors coming out for it as well, but I think the big thing is going to be institutions. Institutions that suddenly are operating on chain, and they need to keep these private keys really safe. They need to put them in a locked vault. They need to have multiple signatures to do anything with those funds. That's going to be big.
It would seem that, we're at that earlier stage where only the techies understand the depths of it. And the next phase, according to our last presentation, is where we make it easier for the average guy. Right? And we're going to need something, maybe a biological handprint, fingerprint, retinal, so that you don't, because humans are awful at remembering numbers, but maybe multi-factor something as an interface on top of all of this, because we're going to screw it up pretty badly.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
I've seen a lot of, that's going to be big, is how do we make sure users do not leave their private keys unless they really try hard to do so. We already have two-factor authentication where you have to have, in order to log into a lot of these crypto accounts, you have to have a 20-second code that appears on your phone. That's been a big thing that I've encouraged people. There's even people that put it on their watch if they have a smartwatch. And so, you have to steal the smartwatch or the phone in order to steal the funds. You can't just steal their email address and password. So going a step further with biometrics, I've seen a couple ideas. I've seen fingerprints, I've seen retinal scans. I think the coolest one was probably one where they embed an NFC chip into your hand, and then you can actually just scan that and get things opened with that. Which is nice because it means that you can reissue that. You can't get a new fingerprint if someone gets a copy, whereas with the NFC chip you can reissue it and you can change it. So that's one of the solutions I see. I think there are people that actually have these things in their hands trying to use them right now. I don't know how well that's going. But it's early days, but I think that's definitely going to be a big. The security aspect of this is going to be massive because you suddenly have very specific things that need to be secure for the entire system to operate in an efficient and trusted manner.
Yeah, for those who haven't read it, there's an interesting Wired article about a guy that forgot the password to his digital wallet, and so go back and find that from last year. Yeah,
I remember the guy that left his hard drive, or his wife, or his girlfriend or something threw out the hard drive, and then it ended up in a dump with millions of dollars of Bitcoin on it, and he's just been rummaging around there ever since, apparently.
So in terms of transaction fees, are there fees when you're sharing information as well to validate that it came from you?
Yeah, and that's actually kind of an issue of the friction of, we have to, you typically don't have to pay for doing very simple transfers, but on a blockchain you do.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for that on Ethereum is, it gets back to the DDoS attack. If you can't have someone just pinging the crap out of your system, because anyone can shut it down at that point if they have enough servers. And so with Ethereum, if you want to do if you want to change any data, like anyone can read it, it's very simple because they have it on their own device anyway if they're participating. But changing data, which is essentially a transaction, whether you're moving money around or you're changing data, that's considered a transaction, and you pay a fee. And the way that you pay a fee on executing code or uploading data is going to be per computation. So if I'm uploading 10 copies if I'm uploading an entire movie, let's say, to the blockchain, that's going to be incredibly expensive compared to just putting in like a simple message. That's going to be like compared to cents to hundreds of dollars, because that's a lot of data to be putting on a blockchain. So you typically, when you do things on chain, you want to be very efficient with it. You don't want to put on anything you don't need to. So one thing they've been doing is there's a platform called IPFS, Interplanetary File Storage, and what they're doing is they're a kind of a decentralized BitTorrent-esque way to store data. And then when you put that data out there on their system, they give you a hash back for access to it. And then you can take that hash and you can put that on a blockchain. And you can say, I own this hash and it's over here.
Oh, okay.
So that's one way that you can, and there are other platforms are talking about. Filecoin is one, where they want to do, anyone can rent out their hard drive for storage on this whole platform. And then we can store it on these individual hard drives. And it's a very difficult problem because you have to deal with managing other people's data on other people's devices, but it is something they've been working on for having a strong encryption around it and something that doesn't have too much latency to work efficiently. So it's early days for that as well, but I think that's where we're headed is a decentralized storage.
So what's to stop though you pretty much touched on this, but if you have a transaction kind of in the queue, if you will,
yeah.
and it doesn't have a fee attached to it, what's to stop that from never being validated?
Nothing whatsoever.
So you could put something out there, and a transaction of money, transaction of a contract, it just sticks out in the ether forever. Yeah, and that's something that's been a big issue. Is there's a lot of transactions floating out there that have never been processed because they don't pay a high enough fee. And so I think right now they do eventually get processed. It might even take weeks. Yeah. But sometimes there just happens to be enough room when they sneak in. But yeah, it's a big issue where if you accidentally don't pay the right fee, it can take a long time. And the biggest issue we've had with fees has been these ICOs. And ICO, okay, first of all, 90%, 95%, 99% of ICOs suck. They're issuing you a token for a platform that does not exist. It's like Spotify going out and having their IPO and they haven't built it. They have a marketing campaign and a website and maybe some of the technical details of how they do it, but the company itself practically does not exist, and they're asking for basically the full value of it. That is basically these ICOs are like most of them are just terrible. There are some of them that I think had a very strong use case. 0x had an ICO and they had an existing product and they have done a very good job of explaining why the coin they offered is valuable because you use it to pay fees on it. But there's a lot of platforms out there that are essentially they're taking advantage of investor hype and they're trying to go out and they're trying to say, hey, we're going to have a great system that'll change the world with blockchain. Just give us all the money up front and we'll do it, I swear. And so far that hasn't gone well because there's really not an incentive to deliver on a product when you've already been paid. Yeah. And there's no property rights on these coins. They're not regulated like securities yet. And so it's become a very hot market for people to do funding. I've worked with a couple ICOs and I've had a lot more come to me wanting to do one. And usually my answer is if you can't make a very strong use case for this token existing, like most of the time, like instead of paying fees in a token, I could just pay it in Ether or other cryptocurrencies that already exist. So I see a lot of ICOs coming out and trying to make a use case for their token, but really they just want easy funding. And I think the majority of them will fail. They'll probably run into security issues. A couple have already, but I think it's going to start to become more tight down the line. And I think honestly, we're going to have securities issued on chain, or essentially an ISO. I think those are going to be great because you can actually do security regulation very easy. You could actually, like these tokens that people are building on Ethereum, you can actually implement in the code and say, all right, here's a list of addresses that are institutional investors and allowed to trade this. And the token itself can actually, when it's told to send to someone else, it can check this list and say, are you in this list? If so, you get sent. If not, we're not going to send it. So it's actually, I think, great for securities. It just needs to be considered a security and regulated like a security. Because frankly, these are securities. Like these tokens are trading on exchanges. People are buying it because they think it's going to go up in value. It doesn't matter what the company says they're going to be used for. If it walks and talks like a security, it's a security by the SEC standards. Yeah. And I'm not a lawyer, by the way, so if you're doing an ICO, talk to a lawyer first. But my advice is no.
So what's going on with the issue of people inserting porn into the chain?
Say that again? Oh man, yeah, that's
porn.
Yeah, that is an issue. It's one of those things where, like, yeah, you put it on the chain and it's very difficult to get rid of it. It's kind of like the dark web in the sense that, like, yeah, it might exist on a blockchain, but if you don't specifically look at it, you might be able to make the use case for. Every person that has a copy of a blockchain does not possess child porn unless they're specifically looking at it.
According to the thing I've been reading, that if you're in that chain, if you got part of the chain, you own porn, and which
that is the way the legal structure looks like now. I think the way they enforce it is probably going to be different, just because it's just a totally different case than what the law was written for. But yeah, it is a strong issue. If we're challenging a lot of legal norms with the blockchain, on custody, these ICOs are challenging it. The issue of data, specifically illegal content out there with the blockchain, is an issue as well. So these are problems that, from a legal perspective, we need a lot of lawyers to solve. And luckily, we do have, especially in Dallas, I've seen a lot of lawyers that are becoming more involved in blockchain. They're trying to look at how this is going to be legislated. They're trying to work with companies that want to be in this space to do it properly. And so that's something that I've seen a lot of. I've discussed with a lot of lawyers, and they have some very good ideas on how this will typically turn out. But those cases, very specifically, especially because they're such hot topics, those are going to be a big issue in the next couple of years. We'll have to see how that gets solved.
With the transparency, I didn't even know that was an issue. So with the transparency of the blockchain, can you even track back to who uploaded that content onto the chain?
You can. So you can see who they are in blockchain, identifying them in the real world.
That's a lot more difficult.
It's a lot more difficult.
So
So
you just have an address that's a random string of numbers. You don't
yes.
know their name.
So if they're using that account for other things, that links back, let's say they went through and they bought something from Amazon using Bitcoin and they gave them their public address, well, now we got them. But anyone that knows what they're doing and doesn't want to be tracked through Bitcoin or blockchain or doing any illegal content upload probably will use separate accounts. And they'll probably use burner accounts because you can create as many addresses as you want. It's a public protocol, so people will do that. And so if you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to track people trying to evade taxes or do idiot things like that. If you buy through Coinbase, you're not going to evade taxes. Coinbase is giving that information to the IRS, and you're like any exchange that is regulated right now, and most of them are now, they're going to be giving that information to the IRS if you don't pay your taxes. So don't try to get away with it. But if you go on the street and you try to buy Bitcoin from people with cash, there isn't really a way to track that.
But can you remove the content from the blockchain? No.
You can only change things on a blockchain if you fork. And you basically, if everyone comes together, if more than 51% of the network comes together and say, we're not going to have this kid porn on our chain. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And every single node comes together and they say, we're going to very specifically remove this block with kiddie porn in it, and we're going to fork over to a new chain. And that's actually, I think, let me see here if I have a copy of what that looks like. Yeah, here we go. So here's the idea of a fork, where we come to this point, or here's the very beginning. Let's say that these two, and most forks have occurred in the blockchain. There's a couple good examples. I think the two good examples we'll talk about is Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin, back in 2017 of August, had an issue where these transactions were an issue. They were piling up. The fees were ridiculous. And all right, how are we going to solve this? We need to make the system more scalable. Two solutions were proposed. One was called segregated witness, where they'll change the way that data is stored on chain to make it a little bit more scalable, and they're also going to increase the block size from 1 to 2 megabytes. And there was another camp that said, no, we can't change, they're kind of like purists in the sense that they don't want to change the initial vision of the blockchain or Bitcoin or whatever, and their idea was, no, let's just increase the block size to 8 megabytes. And that'll take care of it, man. We have plenty of room. The issue with 8 megabytes is everyone's keeping a copy of this blockchain, and it increases with every block cycle. And so, the Bitcoin blockchain is already over 100 gigabytes. And so if you were increasing by 1 megabyte and you're now increasing by 8 megabytes, you are now increasing the blockchain by 8 times every cycle. So that's going to become an issue of, well, at some point, no one but people with giant servers are going to be able to store this blockchain. Yeah. And so Bitcoin Cash was kind of the quick and dirty solution without a very good long-term proposal. And segregated witness is trying to be a little bit more long-term. But the end result was in 2017 they forked. And there are now 2 versions of the Bitcoin blockchain. There is segregated witness, which is kind of considered still the standard Bitcoin, and then there's Bitcoin Cash, which has a separate protocol that they implemented. But the really interesting thing is if you own Bitcoin before this fork, you now own 2 Bitcoins. One on the main chain and one on Bitcoin Cash. So you own Bitcoin Cash as well. And yes, and this is something that my clients, they came, because basically now they're suddenly like, oh, well, I have a private key that's valid on 2 blockchains. How do I get these new Bitcoins that I have? And so I've worked with a lot of clients trying to claim that and then sell it. And Bitcoin Cash themselves were trading at like $1,000 at one point. So you got a pretty nice, it was almost like Bitcoin paying dividends with shittier versions of Bitcoin that you could sell and keep your Bitcoin. So it was great. But it is a weird system where you suddenly have a cryptocurrency that can fork into different versions because people disagree. But getting back to the child pornography, you could have a fork where people say, we're going to remove child porn, or even better yet, we'll put in a protection that keeps child porn from being on the system. And if enough people agree, they can fork that into a new blockchain and remove the previous one. And so the example of that specifically, of a transaction being reversed, is the DAO hack. And the DAO hack was, I was talking about a decentralized autonomous organization earlier. They did that on Ethereum back in 2016. And they were like, oh, we'll create this thing on chain. It'll be great. It'll manage all, we'll give it a lot of money. We'll use it to issue funds to startups doing stuff in blockchain. It'll be great. The problem is that it's running through code. And code has bugs. And so someone found a bug in the DAO hack, or in the DAO, and they were able to steal over $40 million of Ethereum from this decentralized organization. And this was when Ethereum was very much in its infancy still, and people were like, this is insane. Like, you know, so many people in the community lost money through this, and eventually everyone came together, and they were like, this cannot stand. We can't let this happen. And so the majority, including the Ethereum Foundation and Vitalik, they came together and they said, we're going to fork. We're going to create a separate version of this blockchain where this never happened. We're going to reverse all these transactions. We're going to give them back to their rightful owners. And they did that. And it was it was a DAO fork. And there were some people that disagreed. And they were like, no, we realize this is a terrible thing, but a blockchain can't be reversed. That you know, defeats the whole purpose. You can't reverse transactions just because something went bad. And they now are called Ethereum Classic. They trade at like $40 right now. They're basically a version of Ethereum that hasn't been upgraded for the past couple of years. So, but it still trades fairly well. And then Ethereum itself is still running strong. It's the second highest cryptocurrency in market cap right now. But those are, that if we wanted to remove child porn from the blockchain, that's how we would do it.
Can you explain kind of what Ripple is doing with financial payments, and also where do you see the future?
Ripple, yeah, Ripple's an interesting case. I've been watching them for a while. I went to the Dallas Fed in 2015, and they were asking about it, and they were trying to figure out, what can we do this? Because it is not a cryptocurrency. That's the first thing that a lot of people misinterpret about it, and that's partially because a lot of the people that buy Ripple try to like pump it up, and they try to say it's great, but Ripple is it's a distributed ledger tech, and it has a token on it. But the biggest difference is that Ripple controls it. There's not a decentralized cryptocurrency with miners running. Ripple Labs, the company, actually runs the system, and they can make as much Ripple as they want. So that's the first thing you need to understand if you ever want to own it, is that this is something that you can't trust is going to have a limited supply. They can make as much as they want. It's like a bank issuing banknotes. But they are an interesting system where they're trying to go very specifically for cross-settlement payments. They're trying to work with banks to facilitate these payments. They're really the banker coin. They very specifically pitch it to banks. 90% of Ripple out there is either owned by Ripple Labs or it's owned by a banking institution right now. So it's very much an institutional coin, but I do know Santander has come out with a platform with them recently where they want to try and do more cross-settlements. They especially want to use it for international payments because it can cut down the weeks that you typically see for ACH and wire transfers down to minutes with the Ripple platform. So Ripple's going to be interesting. I don't know what the long-term future for it is, but I think for now, it's looking really good because it's something that banks can work with far easier than a decentralized cryptocurrency, and there's a company that can talk to them directly that actually has control of the platform rather than just being someone who pushes updates, but the users are in control. So this is something that banks are more comfortable working with, and they have been working on making it a settlement platform. And I think we'll probably see Ripple working in the back end for some payment solutions that are international very soon. And
Ripple is between banks. What about internal? I know a lot of banks are running most of their some banks are running off most of their internal transactions with on the coin, on the chain. I mean.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something we're using.
But is it like they're doing their own private? Is that what they're doing?
This is going to be
using some outside system as a service.
They're looking for between banks specifically. So for banks to trade with each other, banks do a lot of trading with each other. They like to they do day-long swaps, short-term loans, payments, and so that's something that they see Ripple facilitating far easier because instead of trying to keep a paper trail, Ripple can kind of do it automatically for them. For internal transactions, they could use Ripple, but if they go down that path, I think it's more likely they'll use a private chain like Hyperledger or Corda for that, just because it's something they can control and they don't have to involve Ripple Labs in it at all.
And there's no cost.
Yes, and there's no cost. And Ripple is, they have some cost and they have some fees, but they're fairly low as well. Other questions?
Where do you see regulations going in the future?
So far, regulations have been better than I expected. They've been very kind of hands-off, will come in when there's clearly fraud, but they realize that this technology is probably going to have a long-term effect and probably be a boost to the economy, and they're like, okay, we'll very slowly start to implement things. I think there's a few bad cases. I think the New York bit license was a bad case where I think that was 2015 or 2014 when they passed that. But basically, you know, New York said, okay, we can't have people using Bitcoin if it has the same powers as a banking institution, so we're going to make sure that anyone that uses Bitcoin has to go through a banking institution-like process for using it. And that honestly killed a lot of the innovation going on in New York for Bitcoin, because they actually had a Bitcoin center down the street from the New York Stock Exchange. It was great. Like, you saw the New York Stock Exchange and you actually saw a little Bitcoin sign sticking out a couple blocks down. And so there was a lot of work going on over there, but that got cut off immediately when the license went through, because it was a little ridiculous, because really Bitcoin is more of a cash system and a way of accepting payments. It's not something you use to create a bank yourself. And that's what they basically told companies they had to do. And so you saw a lot of institutions move out of New York, stop doing business in New York. And the ones that could stick around, that could do business, they were the very large players like Coinbase and people that had enough institutional credibility to go through the regulatory process. And guess who's helping them through the process? It's the guy that wrote the law, because immediately afterwards he became a consultant to get people into the system. So I think that was a bad case. The good cases I see a lot more of right now. Delaware is a good example. They're trying to get legal smart contracts to be recognized. Malta right now is pushing through, they've been very accepting. Binance is a cryptocurrency exchange that just moved to Malta. They've been very open with regulation. Singapore has been very good at attracting business. Japan is also, they recognize Bitcoin now as a currency. They've been encouraging a lot more investment. So I see those countries that are really pushing forward on or giving guidance more than regulation on how you operate.
So being supportive.
Yes, being supportive and understanding that most of the companies in this space want to participate legally. They just need to know how. It's not. You got to be communicative. I think the U.S. is in the middle right now. Having states that have different laws makes things a little bit weirder. Texas is very open with it versus New York. You don't even need a money transmitter license to sell Bitcoin here, and so it's going to be interesting to see. And on a federal level, it depends on which institution you talk to on what Bitcoin's considered. IRS considers it property, so capital gains taxes on that. FBI considers it money because they like to do money laundering charges. So it really just kind of depends on the flavor. We haven't really seen guidance from the federal level on what this is considered. We've had exploratory committees. We've had talks of that it's probably pretty good, but we have yet to see some solid guidance from either Congress or from an executive.
So in terms of using the Bitcoin blockchain kind of as a framework for this question, it takes approximately 10 minutes for a new block, correct?
Yes.
And each block is 2 megabytes in size. And you said that process is 3 transactions a second? Is that what you said? Something along those lines?
Yeah, on average, the transactions that will, over the 10 minutes, about 3 transactions per second.
Okay. So based on that, then, is there scalability issues that once you get a lot of people using the same blockchain, if you decrease the time, then the security is a little less strong. And if you increase the size of the block, then the actual amount of room that every node has on its hard drive is smaller.
Yes. And then on the time, it's less a factor of security and more a factor of fair mining. Because you have network latency. And so as soon as someone solves the block, or someone finds that number, they process the block and is adding to the chain, the other miners are still processing the old block until they're told there's a new block.
Right.
And so if they don't have enough time, someone could have created a new block, gotten ahead of them, and then they might be wasting time on the old block because they just didn't hear about it. So when you decrease latency, when you decrease time, then there's more latency involved and more issues of miners possibly not mining efficiently.
Yeah.
And Ethereum has they actually have 15-second block times.
Okay.
And they solve that by if you solve a block, but the rest of the blockchain is already ahead of you, they actually give you a partial reward for that. They're called uncles.
Huh.
And they actually, specifically because they do want to, they wanted to increase confirmation time, or they wanted to make it faster, but more importantly, they did want to they wanted to make sure that miners would still mine fairly and there wouldn't be a lot of forks, because certainly if there's a lot of different people mining on different blockchains, then you actually have forks occurring and people going on different protocols. So that's the big issue. As far as solving scalability, there's a couple solutions out there. I think the biggest one is payment channels. In the case of Bitcoin, that takes the form of the Lightning Network. And what they're doing there is I talked a little bit earlier about, I think it was, yeah, I'll just talk about it. But basically, I talked about early people making their own chains from a root chain. The idea there with Lightning Network is on blockchain, we can actually open up our own little payment channel. And so we still send transactions as Bitcoin transactions, and we still sign them with our private key, but we don't upload them to the blockchain. We just send them to each other, and anyone else who is a part of this little payment channel we've decided to put together. So the cool thing about that is that suddenly we can engage with each other directly, instantaneously. I don't have to wait 10 minutes. You sign the transaction, you hand it to me, and as long as I know you have that Bitcoin, I can take that immediately at face value. So I can do instantaneous transactions through a POS system, personally. I can do micropayments even. I can pay you 5 cents per sticker because I don't have to pay a fee on any of the transactions.
So we have to trust each other because that lacks the verification.
You actually don't. If you put the Bitcoins up. So basically what someone does is I say, I have 100 Bitcoin and I want to participate in this payment channel. You give the payment channel your 100 Bitcoin and it is locked up. It doesn't go anywhere.
Okay, yeah.
And so basically you use that then, it's like a what's a good word for it?
Debit card.
Yes, a debit card. So essentially it's a debit card, the money's sitting there, and then as soon as you want to leave that payment channel, and you want to take that Bitcoin, you want to leave, with either less Bitcoin if you spent more, or more Bitcoin if you're accepting payments, then you can just exit out. And those Bitcoins are then uploaded to the main chain in one transaction. And that one transaction could have been the result of millions of transactions. But you only pay the fee on one, and you only have to process one. So that's where you see Lightning Network just went live. They're slowly starting to push adoption of it, but that's where we're really going to see scalability solutions. Now you have to centralize a bit, you have to trust people within a certain circle a little bit, but you still have cryptography there, you still have instant payment settlements, and you still have the option to go to a main chain if you really wish. So if I want to do $1 million transfer, I might not do a payment channel, I'll just pay normal Bitcoin fee and wait 10 minutes and just go with the legacy system.
Yeah. So do you think could Litecoin replace Bitcoin in terms of payments since it has faster processing time?
I think with Lightning Network it's going to be more difficult because they, I like Litecoin. I met Charlie Lee. I talked to him. He's a very interesting guy. He's one of those guys that he's on Twitter and he likes to be a little bit sassy, but he does like to call people out on the truth and he'll admit when he's wrong. So he's a very, very cool character, but the issue with Litecoin is I think there's so many different cryptocurrencies out there and so many different ways of doing things that Litecoin was like the first alternative to Bitcoin. And it was different in a couple of respects, a 2.5-minute block time instead, a different mining algorithm, a couple different things, but long term, I think it needs to do something else to differentiate itself if it's going to stay valid. And I think they are working on their own payment system as well, similar to the Lightning Network. And they've been doing a lot of work on atomic swaps, which I think are going to be very interesting because atomic swaps are basically, well, I have Bitcoin, I have Litecoin, and I would like to exchange them. But if I want to exchange, previously, if I wanted to exchange them, I went into an exchange like Mt. Gox, and I had to trust Mt. Gox that they weren't going to screw up while I was doing this transfer. With atomic swaps, you can actually have 2 different blockchains exchange this Litecoin and Bitcoin directly with someone. I can say, here's the price. You want to exchange for this much, and we can say yes, and we can, on a peer-to-peer basis, exchange it. So these are early days for atomic swaps, but I think if that technology takes off, that'll be very big. Where you can, that same decentralized marketplace I was telling you about, 0x, that only operates on the Ethereum blockchain because they can't talk to other chains yet. It's only Ethereum and any tokens created on Ethereum. But if we have atomic swaps integrated, then you can trade any cryptocurrency on any blockchain. So hopefully we'll see that. And if Litecoin can lead the charge on that, that is a good use case for them. I think right now it's hard to tell who's in the lead. But I think from what I've heard of Charlie Lee's conversations, he seems to be very much on the ball for that. He's less involved with Litecoin than he used to be, but I think he's still hopeful for it.
For anyone interested in getting a better technical understanding of blockchain, are there any good resources that you'd recommend?
Yes, I think a good start here is we put together a little resource page for the club here. If you go to UTDcrypto.com, go to the side panel and say resources. We put this together. We have put a focus on development right now, just because we have a lot of development workshops. I plan to redo this page and to kind of put the development resources closer to the bottom. But if you're looking for help, if you scroll down and you go very specifically to basic concepts, these three right here are a very good start. This is blockchain. This will go over a lot of what I've talked about kind of in detail of how this works from a conceptual level. You can go to Ethereum 101. This will very much cover how Ethereum works, how smart contracts work, how does the programming language and the cryptocurrency, oh, I've refused to connect. Well, you'll have to try that on your own then. And then introduction to Ethereum. This is also a very good concept. It compares Bitcoin and Ethereum. What is the difference? Why do we care? Things like that. And then as far as going beyond that, there's a lot of resources out there. If you want more of a one-on-one conversation, that's something that I offer. Just do a shameless plug right here. Why not? All right, so this is my website, and so if you're interested, you can come on in, schedule a consultation, and you can pick any one of these. Basically, me or one of the consultants I work with, it'll automatically set up a time. You basically say, I want to meet this time on Monday, and then we just tell you, all right, here's how much it's going to cost, and here's a GoToMeeting link, so the virtual meeting is set up. And you can also, we also do these in person in Dallas and Denver as well. So if you want more of a professional conversation on how to get started on this stuff, this is the way to go. Otherwise, there's a lot of online resources that this right here will give you a good start on. Other questions?
What's going on with Petro?
Oh, the Venezuelan guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't go well for them. Well, it didn't go well for anyone in the U.S. wanting to invest, but yeah. I thought it would be implied that if Venezuela is issuing a cryptocurrency that falls under sanctions, but apparently they decided to issue an order against it anyway and say very specifically, yes, if you own Petro as a U.S. citizen, you're violating sanctions and we're going to arrest you. So don't own Petro. Also, I wouldn't trust the Venezuelan government with anything, especially a cryptocurrency, so don't buy it anyway. Because the idea is, oh, this is going to be exchanged, you can exchange this for oil. I don't trust them to own oil if they nationalize anything they want. So. But funny enough, in Venezuela, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are actually seeing a lot of use because they can't trust their own currency. They can't trust that it's going to be worth the same thing that it was worth a week ago to buy food and to store value. And so there's actually been a lot of Bitcoin activity there. A lot of exchanges that have been set up, a lot of people even moving food across the border using Bitcoin for payments because people literally cannot eat because the government is so incompetent. They make sure that their military is fed. That's about it. So that's how they stay in power. So they get the priority. The rest, everyone else is just in a bad place. Actually, one of my officers with the club is from Venezuela. He's told me a lot about the issues going on here, and so we've had a lot of conversations about how's Bitcoin being used right now? How can we potentially build systems that make this easier? Remittances have become very big for Bitcoin. Well, remittances have been big for Bitcoin since it started out, where Western Union charges like 20 to 30% for an immigrant here to send cash back home to their family. If they don't have a bank account, especially if they're illegal, they can't get money back to, actually, not even if they're illegal, because you have to use IDs sometimes to send large amounts, so even then. But with cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, you can actually, there are people here locally on a decentralized level that will basically, you can pay them in cash, and they'll send Bitcoin to the Philippines where another person will convert it into the local currency and give that to the family. And they can do that, since it's a market rate where anyone can do that, you actually have market rates that are far lower than what Western Union would charge, like 5% or less, in comparison to 20 to 30% that Western Union might charge. So you see, that's been a very strong use case, where you see this working very well at a decentralized level for people to actually move money to where it needs to be, regardless of the friction in making international payments. So I think that's going to be a very big thing. I think that's.
I was reading something recently, and I didn't get the whole story. Are there any attempts on the U.S. government side to spin up a cryptocurrency?
Their own cryptocurrency?
Yeah.
There have been discussions. The Federal Reserve very specifically has discussed this. They call it FedCoin. I don't know. They're more exploratory. It's more exploratory. They're looking at it in the same way that Ripple is being employed by Santander, as maybe this is a way for members of the Federal Reserve, banks that are members, to then basically do what FedWire currently does, to make these instant payments between banks, to make that cheaper, to make that easier, with the Federal Reserve kind of managing that cryptocurrency. So that's the idea right now, but they haven't done anything serious into it. It's mostly just been discussions. Yeah, as far as governments making their own cryptocurrency, Venezuela is one, but it's really not a serious attempt. It's more of they're really trying to get on the ICO craze more than actually have a cryptocurrency that people will use, because ultimately that's like Venezuela is not a great use case for stable currencies, so they're not. I don't think that's going to go very well. But Dubai is talking about it very seriously. They want to actually have most of their government institutions running on some kind of a blockchain system by 2020. They've made that a goal. And they're working very closely with Consensus, which is an Ethereum company, to do that. And I know Singapore has also started to discuss these issues of how do we use cryptocurrency for a national currency. And I think someone has, it might be Singapore, but someone actually has, I think, created a cryptocurrency nationally. I don't know how much it's used or deployed, but that's at least something that they're very seriously working on.
With oil denominated in dollars, do you think the cryptocurrency, they might be trying to move to a cryptocurrency to get away from the U.S.?
Oh yeah, I'm absolutely certain. No one likes using U.S. dollars, but because we basically say that you need to use dollars to buy oil, and then on top of that, you also have the issue of, gold is not a settlement payment anymore, so most people just have to use dollars because that's just something that we can agree has value because the government, because we're so big, our economy's big, our military's big. There's a lot of emphasis on using our currency, but yeah, I think especially China and the U.S., but other countries as well, have definitely tried to start moving away from the dollar because they don't want our monetary institutions to essentially be dictating what their supply and demand are on a currency level. So I know that China and Russia have begun doing currency swaps rather than dealing in dollars. And so there's definitely a lot of serious interest in then using cryptocurrency to also move away from the dollar as an international payment. When do I actually stop?
Good question.
5 minutes ago.
5 minutes ago? All right. I'll stick around as long as you guys want me to. There's still an interest?
Thank you.
All right.